Hello, friends. Bill Hobson here. Welcome to The Big Impact. Thank you for being part of our inspiring, uplifting, and positive discussions that we share on this program. And today's featured guest is one that I can almost guarantee neither of us ever saw coming. As we bring together the idea of musical talent, ministry, therapy, all under the auspices of playing the harp. I knew you didn't see that coming. Stick around. Over the course of the last 5+ years of doing The Big Impact, we have had guests on from all different backgrounds. Our goal is to provide inspiring, uplifting, and encouraging conversations with guests from all walks of life. But I can tell you, I never saw this one coming. A few weeks ago, I received an email from a very caring sister of our featured guest, and she said, you really need to talk to my sister because Christy-Lyn has something special going on in her music ministry, Harp for the Lord. Harp, like the big harp, like dream sequence, angels playing harp for the Lord. And so we now connect from my place in my studio in Michigan. We go all the way around the globe to South Africa and check in with Christy-Lyn. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's good to be here today, Bill. Thanks for having me.
How on earth did this connection ever come about? That's what I have to figure out to start.
Oh, well, I think my sister was just looking for places where people wanted inspiring stories, and she came across your podcast because we're just so amazed with what the Lord is wanting to do with the harp. It still kind of blows my mind sometimes. And so she was looking for spaces that are really wanting to encourage people with exciting things of what's happening in the world because we don't always get to
Yeah.
hear these stories.
I'm so amazed. I mean, I'm looking through some of the background of all of this. You have 38,000 YouTube subscribers. You've got 4.8 million views. You've got 900 members taking 70 different courses from the team of harp players that you've assembled. I never knew it was that big. So when did you start to kind of understand that this was really making a difference and it's really a pretty big deal?
Well, I guess all of that is kind of relative. At what point do you realize something's a big deal? It always feels like it's growing and you're not quite yet where you want to be. So I don't know if I would have described it as a big deal, but I think the moment when I look at what's happening and say, wow, this is really something is going on here, is when I hear people's stories of how learning to play the harp has really impacted their lives and something in their life is changing. And that actually happened from quite early on in starting to create online courses. I had people telling me things like I had been struggling for 6 months and not seeing a lot of progress in my harp playing, and now I've taken your course and suddenly in just a few days I've got progress I hadn't had in 6 months on my own. And when I hear those kind of stories and hear how it doesn't just help someone learn to play the harp, it actually impacts their sense of purpose, because most of the time they've really felt this drive, like some unspoken reason why they just have to learn to play the harp. And when they feel discouraged along that journey, it can really be a blow. So to me, the biggest moment of impact is just seeing how this is changing not only the people's lives who are learning to play the harp, but also the people who get to hear that beautiful music, because it really can change the atmosphere whenever you play harp music.
Now, Christy-Lyn, I can go a million different places and walk in and say, I want to learn how to play the piano. And I can go get a little keyboard if I need to, if I don't have room in the house or whatever, or the budget to get a grand piano. And how do you get started playing the harp? This is not a commonly owned instrument. You're not likely to find one in the secondhand store if you want to get your young person started.
Well, thankfully, there's more and more harp makers making harps now these days, so you can actually buy them online surprisingly easily. It's not the cheapest instrument to get started with, so thankfully there are the options of smaller harps now these days, which makes it a little bit more affordable. But you can buy harps online actually quite easily. You won't find it at the grocery store, but but you can find them online.
How long have you been playing?
So I started learning to play the harp when I was 25. So that's about 10 years ago. And I was quite surprised. My life kind of changed direction unexpectedly with the Lord really placing it on my heart that I just didn't know why, but I just have to learn to play the harp. I didn't even know where it was going. At the time, I was an occupational therapist. And I just felt like I have to learn this thing. I have to learn to sing and play the harp. And it's somehow linked to what I'm meant to be doing in the world. Just this driving kind of passion. And I started, and I didn't know, but the Lord was actually equipping me to help other people learn to play because He wants more people playing the harp.
We read, of course, throughout Scripture, especially through the Psalms, of David playing the harp. We hear descriptions of the harp and the lyre and things, but we don't often see that carried forward into the modern era. There are a few places that I get to travel to, some really nice hotels where they will have an afternoon tea setting, and there will be a harpist in there, and the music is absolutely beautiful. But again, you don't see it everywhere. So when I started to learn of the scope and the reach of your ministry, Harp for the Lord, I was a little bit caught off guard. I had no idea. I thought maybe there was, 300 or 400 people that would connect with this at all. When I see millions of views on YouTube, that's pretty amazing. So how do you see the Lord moving through the lives of those that are both listening and learning to play?
Well, up to now, a large part of what I've been doing with learning the harp is kind of the overarching business that I run. And a lot of people don't know the Lord when they're learning to play from our courses. And we're now starting to do more and more with teaching people to play harp in worship because I've really felt the Lord pressing it on my heart. I've seen it in scripture, and then I've seen it in practice that when you play the harp, just the sound of the instrument impacts people's hearts. It opens up people's hearts to experiencing the Lord. Sometimes they can't even put words to it, but they can just feel the atmosphere changing in the room. And I read in the Bible about David playing the harp, and that he's not the only one. There's lots of other mentions of harp in the Bible as well. And you kind of interpret it and think, oh, sure, the Lord can use music. But there's actually something specific about the sound of the harp that really impacts people. So I've had students who have not even really been thinking about learning to play. One in particular I can think of where during COVID she was kind of just thinking about starting something new, feeling like she needs a new season somehow. And the words just jumped out of the page when she was reading the Bible of like some kind of one of the verses where it talked about the Lord really using harp in worship. And it just jumped out at her and she was like, I have to see if it's possible for me to learn to play this. Then went to YouTube and came across one of my videos saying it's never too late to learn to play the harp. She said she just saw the smiling face and was so encouraged because people don't know that message, that you don't have to start when you're 5 or 6 years old. You can start as an adult and it can be a really beautiful thing to learn to play. And so she starts to learn to play and discovers, oh my goodness, this is something I can really do. And it brings you such peace when you play the instrument for yourself. And then as you grow in confidence and get a little brave to play it for other people, you start to see that the moment you even bring the harp into the room, before you've even plucked any strings, you don't even need to be good at it. It already starts to create interest from people. And wow, I've never seen one of these, and this is so exciting. And then you just pluck a few notes. You don't have to be confident. You don't have to be like the most skilled person in the whole world, but probably people haven't heard this instrument before and they're just so blessed by the sound of the harp because even playing something simple on the harp just sounds so beautiful and really touches people's hearts. Seems to just change the whole atmosphere of the room.
There are a lot of instruments where a beginner can create an incredibly annoying and abrasive sound, right? The neighbors would not care for somebody learning the violin or those first trumpet notes. I used to teach trumpet, and but the harp doesn't have that potential. Everything sounds at least pleasant, even if you're just getting started. But I remember this when I was teaching trumpet. I would rather have a young person who had not picked up an instrument before than somebody who had maybe developed some habits that you had to then teach them away from. same thing applies in the golf swing, for instance. You'll ask a golf teacher, would you rather have a kid or would you rather have a 40-year-old who'd been playing for 20 years and thinks they know everything? What's the learning curve like for the harp? You said you started at 25 and obviously
Mhm.
you're doing quite well at it. So there's a lot of hours involved, but how hard is it to play this thing?
Well, I was a bit of a different case because I got completely obsessed and was practicing like 3 hours a day because, yeah, I just really fell in love with the harp. And some that happens for quite a lot of people, but not all of them have as much time as I had at my fingertips in that time of my life. And I think also the Lord had just specially decided to put fast forward on my life with the harp. But the wonderful thing is that with even just a few weeks, people can play really beautiful, simple melodies that actually sound amazing. So, like you were saying, with something like violin or trumpet, even just making a sound, same with the flute, making a sound can take quite a long time. But with the harp, if you just kind of put your finger to it and just pluck a few strings, it already sounds lovely. As long as you've tuned the instrument, you can't really play wrong because it's tuned in a scale. So I'm already in the right key. I'm already playing notes that all go together, and you can also do the classic glissando, and that you can learn straight away. We almost want to like not tell people how easy that is because it makes you sound so impressive. But actually it's super simple. So we have a program where in 6 weeks you can get from never having touched a harp to being able to play 3 songs and starting to learn to play from chords in worship music. So it really is more possible than you might think.
I love the way that you break that down because students want to see little nuggets of progress as they are getting started. You're not going to go from 0 to 60 in one day. Everything requires practice. But if you can be encouraged, if you can see little milestones get marked off, and whatever the instrument is, you couldn't do this last week, but this week you can. That's kind of cool. And in this era of demanding instant success in so many different areas, I think the investment into musical artistry is one of those areas that requires you to slow down. There's no shortcuts. You cannot get an app just to get better at the harp. You take lessons and you put in the practice. It's the same thing on the piano, the violin, the trumpet, whatever it is. Um, you've got to have some fun stories of students that have kind of broken through and this light bulb went on for them, and they all of a sudden they are playing as if they've been doing it for decades, even though they haven't been. What's it like when you see a student get that discovery or that breakthrough moment?
Well, I think one that's really close to my heart is seeing that people actually can make incredible progress with online courses, because this is something I
Yeah.
discovered through the process of making the courses. I was blown away. So I had a student come to me. At that time I was still teaching one-to-one lessons, whereas now personally I'm just making courses really because I've seen how well they work for people. So I had a student come to me and she said, I've just been learning from courses on my own. I've been teaching myself. I just want to see how I'm doing with my technique. And the typical thing as a teacher who's taught one-to-one lessons is you expect to see very typical bad technique from someone who's been teaching themselves, because generally before the time of online courses, people would just be trying to read sheet music or learn from a book. They don't have anyone to correct them. They don't have anything to copy. And so they just do kind of like the classic mistakes that don't set you up for long-term success. But she had been learning from my courses and she played a piece for me, and I was so blown away. I didn't even know what to say at first, because I would not have, if she had just played, I would have told her that she must have been learning from a teacher from the beginning, because her technique was almost perfect. She was playing with beautiful expression. Like I had almost nothing to tell her to correct, or I just said, whatever you're doing, keep on doing it, and I'm going to go back to creating more courses for you, you know?
Mm.
So I think those moments where it's somebody just on their own in their home, learning from an online course and the results they can get, like teachers from 10 years ago would never believe it, because it's just incredible what people can do when they're excited. They set their mind to it and they put the time in behind the scenes. And it doesn't have to be hours every day. It can be even like 15 minutes, and you can really get amazing progress. So that was a special moment for me.
Was there a big surge in participation during COVID when people were stuck at home? And I mean, was the Amazon guy delivering gigantic boxes to homes around the world?
Yes, actually, one of the harp makers that we're in contact with who sells small harps. So that's the easiest way to get started, is if you buy one that's, more like this size rather
Oh,
than
okay.
a big one or the big huge ones in orchestras. They said their sales just skyrocketed. They suddenly had like unmanageable waiting lists, and people were just so excited to finally follow their dream of learning to play an instrument. I think particularly harp, because it seems like something that's unreachable, that people have often had it on their bucket list, or like my mom used to say, maybe one day when I go to heaven, but I'm not really going to try and do it now. And I think a lot of people had that faraway dream that maybe it's not really realistic, but if I ever had the chance. And COVID was a time where suddenly people actually started acting on those things and thought, maybe I can do this. There's time, and I'm just going to give it a try. And it's amazing to see what people achieve. And for me, it's about more than just harp. And this is for anybody, actually, as an inspiration, that when you feel something on your heart and you have a passion for something, you're not exactly sure why even, I believe it's strongly linked to our purpose in the world, and we mustn't take that lightly. We need to actually act on those things, because it's never too late to do something that you feel that you're being drawn to do, like your heart is in it.
Let me ask you a couple of nuts and bolts questions, like the harp that's next to you there. If somebody watching or listening to this conversation said, you know what, I am in all the way, I want to start with how much is like the one next to you going to cost somebody, or one similar to it? I'm sure you have like the
Yeah, so there's
Stradivarius
there's a
version.
there's a big range. So the huge ones in orchestra, I have one of those. Those are going to start, they're going to be around, let me try and remember what I said. Yeah, I think starting around the $15,000 range. So that's really like quite pricey. Ones this size are around about $3,000 to $4,000 range. But then you can go down to smaller harps like the one I mentioned, starting at under $600. And if you are willing to build a harp from a kit, you can do like 1/3 of the price every time, because some of these harps, like you can build one this
Oh,
size from a kit and then only pay, I don't know what it is, like $1,000 or something.
I cannot
So some
imagine.
people go that route as well.
I cannot imagine how bad the harp would be that I would try to build. That would be quite comical. Actually, that would be a YouTube channel unto itself. Um, every once in a while, and it does not have, maybe once every couple of years, if I'm getting on a flight, I might see somebody in the airport lugging behind them on two wheels a big harp, in a case, and they have purchased a seat for it, because you're certainly not going to hand that over to baggage claim and risk losing it. But for the most part, obviously, you're not going to take that very many places. Um, is there a noticeable difference for you if you travel somewhere? Let's say somebody wanted to bring you in to do a symposium at their church, all about, would you insist on taking your own, or will you walk in and as long as it's tuned, you're good to go?
Yeah, I will play on other people's harps, but I mean, I think usually you would rather get in contact with the harpist, because around here, the churches don't really own harps. But if that was
Right.
the case, I would be very happy to play on somebody else's harp. But the great thing about the small ones is I've actually once flown to an elopement style wedding up in the mountains, and I just popped that small harp in the overhead compartment of the plane. Can you believe it?
Wow.
And
No.
I played the tiny harp because there were only 7 people in the wedding. So you can have a very different experience depending on what size harp you're playing as well.
Okay, so I have a dumb guy harp question for you. Why do you have to tilt it back when you play it? Why does it have to lean back?
So leaning it back, Actually, the harp has been designed to lean back like that, and I think that's partly because it can then be brought to your body and it kind of works better with your body. Whereas if the harp was upright, I would kind of have to like I'm going around the harp.
Yeah.
So there are some harps that have been designed with like it comes backwards naturally, so you don't have to tilt the harp. But what you're doing when you're tilting the harp like that is you're actually finding the balance point of the harp and then taking it a little beyond that. So it's quite light on my shoulder, but allows me to play without it falling forwards. And yeah, I guess I don't know the full answer, but I think it feels very comfortable that way.
88 keys on a piano. How many strings on a full-size harp?
Well, this is a pretty standard sized lever harp where it has these levers on the strings, and this one is 34 strings, but an orchestral big one is 47 strings, and then often a small harp is 26. Yeah.
And I'm just firing off questions at you
Go
because
for
I
it.
find this fascinating. So, like in my world as a trumpet player, I am a huge devotee of the Arturo Sandoval and Wynton Marsalis and some of those big named trumpet players that we've known over the last few decades. Is there a hall of a Mount Rushmore of harpists that Christy-Lyn says, no, if I had a poster on my wall, it would be of this person?
Well, that's interesting because I think me as a personality, I tend not to be like a huge fangirl type personality. So I never had posters on my wall of anything because I don't know, I think I tend to enjoy personal connection and don't tend to like wow like worship these big people as much, but there's definitely some harpists that I really look up to and think are amazing. There was actually one who came all the way from Scotland to a Celtic festival here in South Africa, and she does amazing things with the harp. That's Katrina Mackay. She does it, yeah, she's just doing Celtic harp, and it's just incredible what she does. So there's, of course, people I admire, but yeah, it's interesting because I think some people are more prone to that kind of poster on the wall syndrome than others.
Well, I'm thinking of that, that 17-year-old who has the garage rock band and he gets through high school and he tells his parents who just desperately want him to go to college that he's not going to do that. He's going to run off and start a band, and they're pulling their hair out and they're wondering where did we go wrong? What happened to this boy? I'm wondering what the reaction was among your family when you told mom and dad or your extended family, I'm actually going to really dive into the harp full time at the age of 25, when maybe, I don't know, maybe you were headed at that time down a different career or life path. What was the reaction like? Was it like sideways, turn the head? Like what did she say? Did she just say the harp?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I didn't really, I mean, I have such a supportive family that my parents will, they're really behind me and they
Good.
encourage me when I feel, especially when I feel the Lord is heading me in a certain direction. But I think at the same time, I've taken on a lot of their wisdom of being like, cautious about things. So I still kept working as an occupational therapist part-time to cover the bills until my music grew to the point where that covered the bills. So I kind of took the lower risk option, and but they were just incredibly supportive. I've moved back in with them so that I could, have fewer bills to pay and that kind of thing. So I imagine in some families it would be extremely surprising, but I also have a very musical family, so I think they understand that connection with music.
Yeah, that certainly helps a lot. So for anybody who's listening to us and they're intrigued, at least intrigued by the concept, harpforthelord.com is Christy-Lyn's website. And
Mhm.
obviously you can go to the website. There's no obligation to do anything. But if somebody wants to begin to sign up for a series of instruction, a 6-week basic package or whatever,
Mhm.
let's talk about what that looks like and what that costs.
Okay, yes. So, it's really from the beginning, we start you with just placing your fingers on the strings, the absolute basics. So you don't have to know anything, you don't have to be able to read sheet music. Nothing like that. So it really takes you from like holding your hand through the whole process. And we start with looking at how you hold your body at the harp and all of those things. Then we start with your very first beginner piece. And I've made sure that even the beginner pieces I'm teaching sound really beautiful and satisfying to play, because in my opinion, there's nothing worse as an adult than learning those baby pieces that just sound like, I don't know, hot cross buns or twinkle twinkle little star or
Hot
whatever.
cross buns.
I'm not a fan
Oh,
of learning those as an
that's an
adult.
old trumpet classic. Hot cross buns. Oh yeah, I know that one.
So I think it's a lot better to start with things that already sound beautiful and really inspiring. So you would be learning things like some original songs that I've written that just take the absolute basics and make it sound beautiful. And then also you can learn to play Amazing Grace right in the beginning there. And then I also teach you the basics of how to play along on a chord sheet when you're playing worship music from a chord sheet. So you could actually immediately start playing with a family member who plays guitar or something like that. And it's really satisfying to start playing with other instruments or singing worship songs while you play the harp. So I think it's a really satisfying process. And at the moment, that 6-week program would be $285. And that takes you through everything of the basics that you need to know. And by the end of that, you'll be like, wow, I actually do know how to play the harp in only 6 weeks. You know, it's simple things, but you've got everything you need to get started.
And are there some students who continue past that 6 weeks and there's another series available for them?
Definitely, yes. So our kind of main offering actually is our membership, where people pay an amount every month to just continue learning with us, and they learn a new course every month, or they can learn a worship workshop, and they learn to play songs from online courses. So that's actually how we started off in the very beginning, was just seeing these online courses are really helping people, and then they continue to learn and be a part of our online community of harpists all around the world.
You know, for all of the drawbacks of technology, and there are some, I don't think that's a big secret to anybody. We did an episode last week with a gentleman talking about the battle within families to take back control over technology. Um, for all of those drawbacks that technology has to it, without things like YouTube and Zoom and the ability to connect like this, there's a lot of people who would never have had access to the harp and to the things that you're teaching. So we definitely have some things to be thankful for when it comes to how all of the, I mean, you and I are connecting literally on opposite sides of the globe right now. Um, 20 years ago, you never could have done this. Maybe 10 years ago, you maybe could not have done it to the same extent. So, you know, I am not a believer in coincidence. I believe that the Lord has a plan. His timing is perfect, and he sets these things into motion as he sees fit.
Mm-hmm.
There's a young lady in South Africa who, at the age of 25, decides, I think I'm going to take up the harp. And now look at what's happened since then. And maybe, Christy-Lyn, maybe it's just the older I get, the more I tend to think in terms of big picture thoughts. But does it ever strike you that it's pretty remarkable that the Lord has opened up this door at this time for you to teach this topic?
Definitely, definitely. I sometimes I can't quite believe it, because behind the scenes I'm, growing a team and running a business, and this is not where I tried to aim for. I could never have aimed for doing this myself, but I really feel that sense of significance that the Lord wants more people to play the harp because of what it does to open up people's hearts and to really bring peace all around the world, bring peace into rooms, even if it's just the person playing the harp who experiences that, but when they play it for others. And has there ever been a time when we needed peace more than now?
Right.
And to just sense the Lord's presence and his love for us. And the harp does that in such a beautiful way. I don't think it's a coincidence at all. And I think the more I hear stories from people, the more I'm just convinced that this is more important than we think. And yeah, the harp is just such a beautiful way to reach out and bless the people around us. And I just love it.
Well, how about If I can impose upon you, how about maybe share with us let's go 60 seconds or so of your favorite worship song that you can kind of take us out with today.
Okay.
And the things of this world will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. What a great selection. Thank you. And you're right. It just sounds absolutely beautiful and as peaceful as we need these days in a world full of turmoil. The website again is harpforthelord.com. And as you've been able to tell over the last 30 or so minutes, Christy-Lyn has a heart for the harp and a heart for the Lord. And I hope that somebody who's taken in this conversation, whether they've listened to the audio version of the podcast or watched us on video, I hope they'll investigate. And maybe when you do, folks, tell them you were listening to the Big Impact and you kind of felt this inspiration. And Christy-Lyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been so good to talk to you, and keep up with the great work you're doing.